Welcome back to Sustainability Mindshift, where we are exploring what it takes to be a sustainability leader today, including the skills, capabilities, and mindsets that are critical for success. I'm your host, Brad Pierce, and I am extremely honored to have Patricia Albere with us here today. Hi, Patricia.
Hi.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here with you and your audience.
Awesome. Thank you so much. As usual, I'm just going to tell the audience, speaking of which, a little bit about you. Patricia is an internationally renowned spiritual teacher and best-selling author of Evolutionary Relationships, Unleashing the Transformative Power of Mutual Awakening. We're going to be talking about that today. She is a recognized leader and innovator in the emerging field of intersubjective awakening and post-personal development. She's also founder of the Evolutionary Collective, which is a global community of innovators, pioneers, and WEvolutionaries committed to exploring the highest potentials for human consciousness, cultural and spiritual development through mutual awakening. Patricia is literally at ground zero, folks. She's at ground zero of evolutionary stream of spiritual awakening, which is why I was thrilled to have her join us today in this conversation about consciousness. Lucky to have her. So today, Patricia, the challenges facing leaders, as we were talking about in an earlier conversation, are increasingly complex and unknown and ambiguous. You know, the word VUCA comes to mind: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. For those of you that don't know that, although it's becoming quite a common term today. There's a growing consensus, though, that to be successful for leaders to navigate their businesses through this change and complexity, that they have to learn and develop higher levels of consciousness to see through this VUCA haze. And I know that, you know, there's also a lot of conversation about that we need to solve our problems today, not so much with the technical fixes that we tend to get fixated on, no pun intended. But even though those need to be a part of it, the future really is dependent on our ability to look at things from new paradigms, and to be able to see these new paradigms, it requires a higher level of consciousness. So you've spent your life and working in this field, clearly, starting with work, as we were talking about it. I was amazed at the work you've been doing and how you've been involved, again, from ground zero with cultural icon and transformational movement pioneer Werner Erhard. For those of you that don't know, he was then working on what was called the Human Potential Movement and helping build and expand, or Patricia was working with him anyway, to help build and expand EST, which was called Erhard Seminar Training, into what's currently known today as Landmark Education. I did several of those courses. And by the way, folks, for those of you that don't know Werner Erhard, the work he was doing as a pioneer now exists throughout all the world of coaching. Transformational coaching essentially stemmed from the work that he was doing. And so Patricia was right there in the early days with him. And later in life, I know I'm telling your story here, Patricia, so we want to hear from you. Later in life, you met the love of your life, speaking of which, that took your learnings and teachings to a whole new level. And you can tell us a little bit about that today. This is what you describe as your mutual awakening practice that you wrote about in your best-selling book as well. So tell me more about what is mutual awakening practice, and why is it so critical for leaders today?
Yes, thank you. Well, first, I love what you said, which is that the solutions, you know, in the Einstein quote, which is way overused, but very true, is that really and truly, if we don't start accessing a level of not only thinking, but almost like a level of consciousness, a level of living that's beyond the mess that we're in, because everything that I see, including all the issues of sustainability and all the breakdowns that people have in their lives, their marriages, with their families, politically, in every which way, is based on that we're on separation. So we're actually way, way too separate. And the design that we're in is that we're separate individuals. You know, we're in a very Newtonian kind of world of separate objects moving around in time and space and figuring out how to, you know, propel them or manipulate them or stop them or, you know, do the various things. But, you know, in this very separate world, even in our separate world of growing and paying attention to what we're feeling, you know, sort of the level of consciousness of being more attuned, it's not enough. I know a lot of very attuned people that are fairly awake, and I don't think they're managing what's going on any better than the people that are pretty asleep. So there is another order of awakeness. The mutual awakening is that quality of waking up into a shared subjective space. Subjective, let me just, the terms, all right, identify terms.
Yeah.
So subjective is, if I asked everybody to close their eyes, they probably, the people that are listening to you, if they did that, they could sense into their subjective experience, what's happening with their bodies, on that level, maybe what's happening emotionally and mentally, like how busy is their mind, what are they thinking about, energetically, what's there. And then maybe even they could pay attention to the more invisible kind of causal dimension, something that's a little less, that you can grab onto. All the work is usually subjective. Self-development work is generally subjective. What's your authentic voice? What's your really truth? It's all about this. And, I spent 50 years working on that, literally, not 50, 40, working on inner development and thinking that if you could just get everyone developed individually, that would then come together in a better working team or, or things working. And to be honest, it isn't necessarily true. People that are more awake and attuned to themselves don't necessarily work better together in a group, nor do they necessarily function at a higher level together. So, just to give you a minute and the people that are listening, because even though we think, well, it should be, I had a friend who is a thought leader and was invited to be with the Dalai Lama at the Pope's Summer Palace. So Deepak Chopra was there, and the various luminaries that many of us at least know who they are and trust them. And he was super excited. He thought, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. And he said it was an honor. It was great to be there, and these people were beautiful and wonderful, but nothing really happened. Each individual gets up and kind of does their thing, and then the next person gets up and says something inspiring. But you have like some of the most amazingly awake humans on the planet in one room. And there was nothing happening in the space between them. So people's ideas, some people have, even like spiritual ideas of like, if everybody could be like the Dalai Lama and like Tesla or something, then the world would work. We would really get along and it would work. And what he demonstrated was there's something missing in the level of consciousness that we're trying to awaken into, even at the people who have won the game of being as awake and, kind of morally good, etc., and having actually spiritual energy. These people have transmission. They can actually, awaken others. And so for me, I won't get into the long story of what awakened for me after I was with Werner, but I was with a beautiful man who was a mystic and very meditative, very driven. He was like, if he had been obsessed about money, we would have, had tons of money. But he was not obsessed about that. He was obsessed with awakening. He was obsessed with becoming awakened, like one of those guys who would meditate in a cave for 3 years and not come out until something had happened. And we met, and given my background of being very intense and committed and had led groups and worked with transformation for 12 years in a big way. So I'm fairly obsessive, in my ability to go there and to love, and to really kind of give my heart, in an intense way at a higher level, like to people, not just to an individual. And then his mystical side. And when we came together, what happened was we turned towards each other and something awakened between us. So it wasn't like he was in a certain state or I was in a certain state. Something had us, something had taken over. And besides being in love and
right,
having
more than
all
love.
the juicy, wonderful things that one has in that domain, we were being kind of undone and taken into a different kind of consciousness, different kinds of psychic, different abilities were coming through. and just a ridiculous intensity of intimacy and love, and the sacred was there. And we were always connected, and I'm sure you have some people who have experienced having a very special kind of relationship, possibly, maybe it didn't last forever, but where you were literally with them all the time. It's kind of like they were never not, you could hear, like, you go, I remember one time feeling sad, and he was in Germany, he was German at the time, and he literally, the phone rang, and before I said anything, he says, "What's wrong?"
Wow.
And it was always like that. Do you know what I mean? Like
quantum entanglement or something, right?
Plus, it was absolute quantum entanglement. That's right. So there's a level of connection, and then a turning towards, instead of trying to, meditate, we were turned towards each other in a very particular way, which is one of the things that I teach, that opened up this kind of awakening together, this unitive, it's almost like a way to live. It's not just consciousness. It was almost like you're in a different kind of way of being that allows you to not only feel them, hear, if he thought something, I could actually sense it. Do you know what I mean? And I was more myself. I felt fiercer and more vulnerable. Like your sort of God self comes through. There's a certain connection to that part of you that's very, very kind of awake and divine and not egoic. Very, very, yeah.
That happened to you. So through experiencing this man, it literally just sort of happened to you. But you've over the years then taken that experience of that feeling and that call it consciousness and quantum entanglement, and you've been able to sort of rationalize it, I guess, right, and turn it into something that you can then help others go through a process, correct?
Yeah, I had worked with over 200,000 people teaching groups, so I have a lot of teacher group skill. Obviously, it's like being in the Beatles, like I got to do that every night of the week for, years and years. What happened was I was with him for 4 years. I don't know if I would have tried to teach it to anybody because it was so compelling, like there was nowhere else you wanted to be, but to have this happen and to be shown, it's like being in some kind of extraordinary gift that you don't ever want to leave. Unfortunately, he died after 4 years, which was its own, nightmare. But I was awakened inside this way of being together. So it was even weirder and harder because the world I was in, which he was, this shared awakening, wasn't by myself. And so it took me maybe 10 or 12 years of wondering, like, why did I have it? I was grateful, but I was also sort of left on my own, right? I continued to teach people, but I didn't even try to do anything with it for a very long time. And around 12 years later, I started to feel like there was something about working with people individually, on their shadow, on their work, on their, transforming their lives, on, even in groups and team leadership and stuff. It was kind of like there's something that's over here for me. And then I started realizing that it's time on the planet, like it's time in human development for a different order of a way of being together. And it sounds extreme. I mean, I'm definitely more on the radical side of things because I've always been at the beginning. And at the beginning, it always sounds crazy. I mean, when we were doing the coaching stuff at the very beginning, I used to say transformation to people in 1971. I was like 18. And people would say, "You mean like a butterfly?"
Yeah. What are you, a butterfly?
They had no idea. I mean, there was just no context for that at all. And so with this, there's a unitive, there's a way in which to access being awake together, that this unitive flow starts to happen that can be unbelievable, could be unbelievable for teams, actually. It would take, it would take an unusual set of people, that are willing to do something that's on the edge, that isn't just like, I mean, now coaching is part of, like, it was innovative in the 70s. Now it's more highly acceptable, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everybody does yoga too. People were not doing yoga in the 70s much. So with this, though, you have that possibility. What everyone wants to do with a team is you want to bring them in that kind of oneness together. You want to have them work together and create together and be in with and for each other and, do amazing things together. Like, when every once in a while that happens, there's a flow, like there's something magic that when it occurs on a basketball team or you see it with a music concert, something goes like this. You can feel that something has gone from a bunch of people into something that's bigger than that. Mm. And so I was given like the geometry of that, like what is that? And how do you bring that forth for 2 people, 4 people, 5, 10, 100, we're working directly with about 150 people that are very inside and committed to this kind of connection and being in that kind of a flow state. So, and experimenting with that, because that if that was everywhere in the world right now, instead of all the trying to herd cats, trying to get people to cooperate with each other, which is maddening.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, you think about 150 people as a, in that flow state and as a super organism, how powerful that could be, It's
amazing. The other thing is we usually, I call it non-egoic shared unity. Mm-hmm. You and I were talking before, when we were talking the other day about, the Navy SEALs, the people, when they have those Black Ops teams where they kind of, you can tell they're functioning on some level that even they don't understand, but they're totally synced up, mm-hmm. and their instincts, and they're able to like do something as one. And they spend, millions of dollars getting them to the point where they can do that. Yeah. We actually know how to create that shared space and that leaning into not knowing and following the emergence. And like, there's a whole way to do that actually is pretty simple.
What do you think keeps, so, I think that you've said a couple of things interesting. So one is, that there's been a perception that to achieve a certain level of sort of consciousness, some people think it's a solo, venture that, again, the old man that goes into the cave on the mountain, or in this case of today's leaders, maybe they have to go on some sort of retreat, and immerse themselves somewhere and come back as the enlightened one, and then try to sort of share that enlightenment with their team. And there's also maybe some fear of if you were to talk to a leader about doing this in a mutual way, there's a lot of vulnerability that they have to be able to expose, in groups of more than just themselves, because they're getting to the heart of who they are. And well,
it's not that. Just sorry to interrupt you. It's not that kind of vulnerability. So we always think of personal vulnerability on a very personal level, like your childhood or something like that. That isn't what I'm talking about. I mean, that is irrelevant, actually. In the domain of mutual awakening, you're connecting from a different source of identity. So, a lot of the things that people are learning is to connect from the more like egoic side, your wounds, your gifts, things you're good at, your winning formula. You remember that, the things you're good at. And those are all useful, but it's not the deepest connection. Not at all. I mean, not at all. We're trying to connect through diversity. We're trying to connect through our backgrounds and our blood, kind of DNA. And all of that those need to be navigated, but you can't connect through it. You really can't. Mm. I can only listen over here compassionately. So if you were to share something vulnerable, I'm still separate. I'm over here. I'm listening to you, and I'm listening compassionately, but I'm over here and you're over there. Oneness is not that. Oneness is where somehow we're inside together. We're in the experience together. That's oneness. And then communication falls apart. You know, communication, those Black Ops guys are not talking to each other. There's some other level of communication that's kind of going through the organism as they're moving and doing things that they have spent, you know, a lot of time and energy learning how to get to that kind of attunement, to not have judgments against each other, to keep it clean, so that they can actually function as something larger than just a bunch of guys together doing something.
Yeah, you mentioned another example too, which I thought was interesting, about a friend and during 9/11 and how that sort of organically took shape.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the promise of that there's something I'm pointing to that is eventually going to be where humans go. You know, there's always people that are at the beginning of things, and then there's like, you know, 50 years from now when it starts to happen more for the rest of the planet, right? You know, it's always like that. It's like the Renaissance. But that it gave me hope, like when 9/11 happened. I had a client and a friend who was an emergency medicine physician in New York City, and he was also the head of one of the hospitals in New York, and he also did Doctors Without Borders. So, you know, he's been around a lot of emergencies and disasters and things. And when I spoke with him, like 2 days after the event, I was supposed to do a coaching call with him, actually, for him. And he just said, it's amazing. You know, I was like, I thought he was going to be a wreck. And he said, there's something happening. He goes, the moment I went down there, we were just all inside this share, like it was almost like being an organism together. And I was doing this and someone was doing that. And, you know, and it was complete disaster and crazy, but people were flowing. And he said, I was almost high. Like, it was awful. And it was amazing. It was like a miracle, like what was actually occurring. And I think many of us felt that, you know, like around 9/11, we weren't down there like he was, but there was some bubble, like there was something for a couple of days where we were kind of inside something. A friend of mine from New York said nobody was honking their horns. And, you know, for a couple of days in New York, like there was just something.
I think it lasted
different.
longer than a couple of days. I mean, I think that event transformed New York, you know, in so many different ways. I used to frequently visit New York and found that, you know, the energy, the vibe there was so different after 9/11, and not just because of the trauma, of course, and you know, the sort of the obvious stuff, but there was really I felt like a new level of, you know, kind of human connection and understanding that didn't exist before. Yeah.
Like something opened for a bit, kind of like what Peter and I had. It opened for 4 years. If that had stayed like that for 4 years, the world would have gotten and then it went away. The world would have gone crazy trying to figure out what the hell you needed to do to sustain that, because it's a very different, like, world to be connected in. And that's basically what I've, you know, I experienced. I mean, I actually have the experience for 4 years of being in a different state of a way of being, but then we've worked with a few thousand people at this point, and can successfully bring them from being very subjective, very much in their own world, into and egoically, or, you know, and some people who are meditators have pretty strong egos, I must say. You know, there's no guarantees that, you know, there isn't this membrane of separation. And then when you move into mutual awakening, you learn how to turn towards another person, begin to enter into a shared inner space. It's almost like it's an inner space, but you're both in it.
So how does it, interestingly, you say,
that's what's interesting. Yeah.
And I was just thinking as you were saying that, you know, there are people that, you know, from the outside may look like, you know, people that you would think would be, you know, open to diversity and the environment, you know, and things that, you know, how we want to shape leaders to be better leaders in the future, to be thinking about things like the environment, society, and all that, right? From a sustainability perspective. even if they meditate, doesn't mean that they focus their energies in that way. To your point, they may still carry that ego around. So the question I'm leading toward is how, if they have the ability, let's say these leaders, to do this shared mutual awakening, does it by default then open up new insights to this consciousness of being one with the earth, or being more respectful of nature and human life and all that stuff? Or could it be used on the flip side if they gain access to this higher level of consciousness, even in mutuality, and still use it for bad things? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, that's it's a good question.
Yeah,
it doesn't actually. So evolutionarily, okay. I need to complete something I didn't complete before. I just remembered that when you were talking about that being vulnerable if you're a leader with your group.
Yeah.
Right. So I just want to say something, because it's really different than you think. If you start to connect with this level of consciousness, there is a kind of transparency, even like that was what Peter and I had. There was like a transparency in how we were, like it was just kind of clear. When you enter into that, part of what is also there's an orchestration. So rather than everybody gets to vote, like when you're trying to do leadership things and everyone has a say, personally, I find that horrifyingly difficult. Like I've been around organizations like Naropa. I dated somebody at Naropa a long time ago, and it's a university in Colorado that's very, very, left, I guess, very open, and everybody had to have a voice about it and process how they felt about everything, which is just crazy. I mean, that is not, maybe it's useful at some level, but it's not very efficient. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to really move quickly. Do you know what I mean? Like if you really want, like right now, we need things to move quickly mm-hmm. and effortlessly without a whole lot of ego in the way. And we need to listen and be attuned and function in relationship to what's happening in a very real way in the earth and all of it. It's like feel all of it. And if you're a leader and you bring your team into that, part of what happens is the orchestration of who, if you're the leader and you mostly know what to do, people flow and follow you, not because you're dominating them, but because, like the brain is different than the arm. So it's kind of this sense of symmetry, asymmetry. If someone all of a sudden rises up and they have they're clear about how to go to the right and we need to go to the right, you effortlessly follow them. You don't care. It's your turn or my turn or it's completely different. You do what works. So there's an orientation, what works, what flows, what's actually going to be the most efficient, most result producing thing, rather than I'm the boss or you're the this or I'm the that or everybody has to feel into it. I mean, all of that is too clunky. It's too slow. And so if you do go here to this level of consciousness, the whole thing starts to just flow and move and you can breathe, and you don't have to keep tiptoeing around everybody's egos of they're going to feel bad if I don't let them do this. And, and I don't thank them. And, there's all these things that people are usually having to navigate, which is just too slow and too separate.
Mm. But it sounds like, though, that if there is a leader that is leading this organization in the right direction and they're in that flow and people are following them, there has to be some sort of alignment of values then, I would think, because you wouldn't just follow someone necessarily if you felt like you were doing something bad, although maybe people would. I guess it gets back to that question of, can leaders who are in the flow lead and have that level of consciousness for the wrong outcomes that they're trying to create. Wrong being, against the grain today, where or actually it's not against the grain, but leading an organization down a
wrong path.
Yeah, a wrong path.
Yeah. I think here's the other saving grace to what I'm pointing to is you have to set up other elements of the container, right? So if you were to work with an organization and you start to bring people into this level of consciousness and this level of like being able to go into a way of working together, you also have to set up like the values and, people really being there for the right reasons. And, I mean, you can't just do that with any bunch of people that have different agendas, right? I mean, that wouldn't make any sense anyway. But part of the access to this, so this particular unitive flow state is also very non-strategic. So when you get there and the way that you lean into it, it's so pure. Like there's such a guileless quality. There's such a, it isn't about like somebody's agenda, which is very egoically, we're very strategic and we're going to do this and then we're going to do that. And then I'm going to get them to do this. All of that goes away. So it doesn't mean you don't have goals, but that strategic way of being is also too slow. Mm. It's way too slow. Do you know what I mean? Like the whole, even if you think about, like, this will sound probably challenging, but, free will, we're watching a world of individuals with free will, which is part of the design of what it is to be human, right? Mm-hmm. And everybody's deciding all the time about everything, which, with 8 billion people, and if we have 10 billion or 12 billion, you can just kind of do the math, like get a sense of where we're headed. Yeah. And it's been the design, it's been the way that it has to be for human beings, but going to a higher level, the people that are really in flow, they're not sitting choosing. Choosing is too slow. Those athletes that go into incredible flow states, they aren't thinking at all. Like they don't even know who's there. There isn't even a sense of self to some degree. You're just literally, something is coming through, and later you're like, wow, what was that? Oh, wow, I was great. There's a selfless quality that occurs in mutual awakening. There's a selfless quality where you just have your attention on something so much bigger together that it's not about you, me, he, do you want to? I don't know. How do you feel about it? All of that is just gone. Mm. And you're feeling something bigger that you really can surrender to. It's not the person or the boss. It's like there's something larger that you're moving with. And that feels incredible. That feels very clear. Not like you're being manipulated by somebody's charisma or something like that.
So it can be very powerful with organizations that do have as you said, the right set of values and are aligned and moving in the right direction toward, sustainable transformation or regenerative transformation, that
they would really have a chance.
It'll help accelerate that, which is what we need today. Exactly. We're running out of time.
Let me just say one quick thing, just because I think you're going to want this in there, is meditation takes people into more of a theta state, theta delta. It's a slow brain state that allows you to kind of like not care, like you kind of just let go and you're like, you don't even want to move. If it's really good, you don't even want to move. And it's wonderful and very relaxing, but it doesn't activate that kind of flow. So gamma, which is the highest frequency, that's meditation's a very low frequency. Gamma is very, very high. And that's when you're in the zone. And all parts of the brain are functioning together, both hemispheres. And there's a certain part of the prefrontal cortex that calms down and isn't worried about the risk. And is, like there's certain, the superego isn't telling you, are you sure you really want to do that? Like that part of you that's self-criticizing kind of calms down and something else is operative. And that's where the mutual awakening brings people into high gamma states together.
So is that then what people would consider sort of emotional and spiritual intelligence and mental intelligence all combined in that gamma state?
And plus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And there is a sacred quality. There's no other way to put it. Like when people have those experiences, no matter what they're doing, whether it's sports or making love or, if you ever get lucky and get into one of those states with another human being, it's like a blessing. Like there's something about it that's very, very compelling and very nourishing, just because.
And a lot of people must feel, I mean, I've been there, but it's been isolated events too,
Yeah.
and so the big question is, how do you, well, I guess it's exactly what you're talking about today, but how do you then not just look at those as isolated events? Like I had this epiphany out in nature and I was, looking out at the sunset and felt that connection to the universe or whatever it might be, or with somebody, even, if there's that mutual sense that you have of being with somebody.
Yeah.
But then how do you take that and apply it then to more daily practice so that you can, continue that buzz?
Well, we realized that, I had Peter, so I had somebody all the time that I could do it with until I didn't. And now once we teach people, so we do a 4-week class that takes people into their ability to come into that oneness, right? Reliably. And then we have an organization. So every day, once or twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day, there are classes on Zoom that we've been doing way before the pandemic, where people come on from all over the world that know how to practice, that know how to go there. And then for 55 minutes, I'll teach, or the other teachers teach, people come on and they're paired up and they go into a half an hour practice, which is a particular what they've learned. And we're all kind of in there together. There's like 70 or 100 people. And then we have a little bit of time for sharing afterwards. And it's just, I don't know how I would still be here with the amount of optimism that I have if I didn't have that. Given the way the world is spinning. People are on time, they're present, they're there, they're meeting, you meet like inside that space with real wholeheartedness and depth. And then something opens and it's just like you're being fed something, and something keeps developing so that when you turn back to your life, you're just less obsessed with yourself too. I mean, there's a certain amount of working on yourself that kind of can become a little narcissistic.
Yeah. And I imagine a big part of it is a language that you develop. That was something that I really appreciated about Landmark is, learning the language, and things like, as I mentioned before, one that sticks with me is pay attention to the story you're telling yourself, which is always a great one to just question your ego and how you're self-doubting or whatever it might be in any given situation, or inflating your sense of ego in any given situation, thinking you're more and better than others, or what you're facing. So how does that language play out, and how do you keep them after they've been through one of your programs? Do you keep them going?
Well, the ongoing practice community, the global community, you can practice every day if you want, or twice a week, or like an exercise, like a gym, but it's for this. But as you're practicing, rather than more even trying to be self-aware, something keeps going. It's almost like because you're in that gamma state and you're in this place, there's things that just become like, you can't even go there. You can't even like think that thought because there's nothing holding it up. And because of the nature of the practice, there's no story in the practice. There's only being exactly with what's emerging and being inside something together. And you learn how to like not be strategic, how to let go and let something else start to happen. And it does. And so when you turn towards the world, you just feel quieter naturally, without having to watch something spin on your watch. It's really, and more selfless, and more in a space where you're just kind of with everything. It isn't just like me paying attention to just what's here. I'm like with all of it. Like I can feel the dog that's walking up the street. You kind of like can feel this intimacy with all of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like the Matrix, right? You're in it.
Yeah, I guess, it's completely different. And the people that have come, I have a lot of teachers and coaches, people that have been around the block as far as having done their fair share of individual work. And they kind of are like, oh my God, like it really is another shift into a different way in which things can grow. I mean, Keegan's self-transforming mind, for those who are listening to this that know Keegan's work, Dr. Robert Keegan's work from Harvard, this takes you into self-transforming mind. So it takes you beyond the kind of self-authoring, I can make it happen, personal development level. So it's kind of fun.
Well, I can't wait to enroll in your course. In fact, it's a good time now to talk about that. You were very generous in offering listeners a gift, so thank you. And that gift is that she's offering you the ability to take her Introduction to Mutual Awakening e-course, which is on her website. It's www.evolutionarycollective.com. And I'll put that also in the comments and other promotional materials. But it includes the free course and a starter kit and the first 4 chapters of her best-selling book, essentially, with some practical exercises and additional insights that she's offering you, which will get you started on this journey and get you start to experience what it's like. And you could bring that into your organization and enroll others in that and hopefully get your whole entire team on this other level, this gamma wave level of consciousness.
It's and the book too, like the first thing they'll get if they download the e-course has to do with to know the difference between longing and desire and how powerful that is. And there's something there they could definitely use with their teams because it's strong. But anyway, yeah, it'll fill in some of the gaps. Like I'm sure they don't really understand what I'm saying, but if it's if they feels like curious and interested, it'll fill in some of the details, so it'll make more sense, hopefully.
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of it must be also just stuff you eventually feel. There are no words for it, like you said. It's when you get to that level, you don't need to really think. You're sensing a lot of the stuff. Yeah. Yeah,
and the leaders, if they do this, people will be like, who are you? Like, where did you come from? How do you know that? Because there's a level of clarity and insight and depth that is just so loud when you get into that place where you can't not see what is.
You mentioned a story. We'll end with this, but you said Werner himself was walking by at one point in time and sort of tell that story.
Yeah, I was very young, and one of his teenagers, who he was gracious enough to give me a lot of opportunity, and he walked past me. He and his entourage, they were coming down the hall, and we were doing something in a hotel, and then he turned and went the other direction, and I was young, and so I was kind of like, well, like he didn't even say hello, because I felt very close to him, and he got about 10 feet down, and I didn't do anything. I didn't say anything, but I said it. And he turned around, he says, you think I didn't hear that? And I was like, I looked at him and he goes, sweetheart, come here, and then he gave me a big hug and he was laughing at me. So, but he was always like that. I mean, he had the most amazing capacity to hear, see, know, deep. Do I mean, like the deeper you can see, the more everything is different. Leadership is an entirely different thing when you can actually see into not only people, but also evolutionarily, which we didn't get into that conversation, we won't. But like this, what I'm pointing to is connected to the future present, not the present or the present past. It's not just taste the strawberry. I don't find that helpful. That it's lovely, but it doesn't answer the moment. The future present, we need to be being pulled by the future, by the evolution itself, by seeing and feeling like, where are the solutions? And the solutions are outside of the present, and they're outside of the present past, for sure.
That's beautiful.
And they're outside of the future we can imagine, because we're not that clear. It's kind of like evolution itself is what creates the possibilities for existence. So we need to be connected to that so we can actually start to move into a future that will actually function and work.
Yeah, the future is calling. Nature's calling. It's time. I think nature is life. Life is calling us to to get out of our own heads, get beyond our egos, and find true meaning and consciousness through each other. I really appreciate everything you've said today. Much of it was above my head, so I can't wait to get into your course and learn more about it, and become more of an enlightened soul myself with you.
Yeah, I can't wait. I would love to teach you this. That'll be a privilege.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.
Yeah.